So, Joe and Cleats, Rising Tactics, your many personas. Thank you so much for sitting down with me for a few minutes today.
Absolutely, Kevin. Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Oh, honestly, it's really my honor. I mean, you have grown so much in your field in just a short span of time due to the quality of your product. I'm just ridiculously happy to see what's going on with you. Do you feel good about the exposure? Every time I turn around, there's a show having you on. There's another article. It's been great for you.
It's this season has been a really fun ride. Obviously from what we saw from Phoenix on the field was great, and it was a really fun experience for me to be able to chronicle this season and throughout the year. But yeah, there've been some really enjoyable opportunities that I've been blessed with this year that if you'd asked me before the season had started, I wouldn't have known or expected or anticipated any of it. But it's been a really enjoyable ride this year for sure. And you're a big part of that, honestly. You and I have talked about this before, but I'm super grateful for you guys and for you specifically, Kevin, for kind of opening some of these doors for me at the beginning of the year.
Well, again, whatever little I did, it's to the benefit of the world because you really do produce stuff, and we're going to get right into it with that statement because some of the insight that you generate on games tactically. I mean, I'll sit there watching a game and I'll be like, I can't put my thumb on it. I can't put my thumb on it. Something's happening here. I don't know what it is. And then I read your article and I'm like, oh, that's it. You are so clear on the way that you describe the game, tactically what's happening, why changes are made, why a certain play develops the way that it does. I was listening to you on another interview on the hundreds that you're doing now, and they were talking about, maybe it was Tyler Terrans who was talking, and Devin Kerr who were talking about you didn't play the game, doesn't matter because you are able to see the game like any player would see the game, that had been down there on the pitch.
It's definitely it's a lot of work to get, and I have a lot more to do. Let me get that out there first of all, in terms of my knowledge of the game and understanding. But it's encouraging, especially you mentioned, Tyler and Devin, their comments about, you don't always have to have played at the highest level to be able to understand and to see some of these things. And so, yeah, there's room to grow, but it's been this season being able to focus on one team from start to finish and see the little developments along the way. It's been a great experience. It's been really valuable for me personally, and I'm glad that some of that insight was able to be helpful to others as well.
Yeah, well, I think they mentioned maybe in just a little bit that you could be the fourth honest lad. Their math is off because they're down to 2 right now, as you
Yeah.
but I could totally see you becoming a part of that show and adding the tactical piece. They do provide a lot of good tactical information because they're great, but you could deepen those waters so much. It would be a great pairing.
But it was fun to catch up with those guys when they were here, for sure.
Yeah, they're good guys. But anyways, let's talk about Phoenix Rising. I've run out of Prozac. And that statement really is ridiculous because we were regular season champions. That's really the award that matters. The trophy is a one-off crapshoot, and we just didn't pull it together for a game against Real Monarchs. If you look at that game from 500-foot level, what would you say was the number one thing that kept us from beating the Monarchs?
I think, and this is something that Rick Shantz mentioned after the game, it was just a couple of unfortunate defensive errors, not necessarily from any one player, but from kind of the team as a whole. Maybe it was a slight lapse. I mean, Monarchs were able to score 2 goals time, and both of those goals were not necessarily easily preventable, but they were preventable, right? It was maybe team-wide breakdowns where they didn't apply quite enough pressure after they lost the ball in the attack, or weren't able to step quickly enough to the ball to close down space in their own box. It was those little errors that, as you mentioned, Kevin, in this kind of one-off crapshoot sort of competition, those are the ones that bite you. And we absolutely saw that, last week when Phoenix fell, and at that point down 2-1. Yeah, they pretty much threw everything but the kitchen sink forward into the attack, but the Monarchs didn't break down, and Phoenix couldn't eventually break through either way. So it really is those 2 defensive mistakes that end up killing you in the playoffs.
So I want to go back to that because I totally agree with you. What stood out to me when Rick was talking after the game was when he said it's hard to keep team motivated after the winning streak and going as long as they did. And when the team went out on the field, not against Monarchs, but in games previously, there were times where it really took the team a long time to warm up on the pitch, to really engage with the game. And with the Monarchs, it was the opposite. I felt like we came out red hot, and then over time we cooled off. Did you see that also?
I agree. I think the way they started was really encouraging. That first goal went in, and Flemings hit that strike into the bottom left corner, I think it was, and it kind of felt like in that moment that okay, this is it. Like they're gonna go and run away with this because we had seen slow starts in the past, and that clearly wasn't one of them. But yeah, it was a total flip flop from what we'd seen kind of after the winning streak, or maybe even at the tail end of that streak when we did see this team struggle to come out a little bit, maybe because they had the mentality that, we end up winning regardless. We don't have to start out super hot. We can take it a little easy at the beginning of matches and we'll come back eventually. And, to be fair to these guys, they did that over and over and over again on the winning streak and kind of when it mattered in the regular season. And so why there was sort of a flip in energy from the start of the game to later on in that match against the Real Monarchs, I don't know. But I think that's a great observation to make, that it was a contrast from what we'd seen so often in the regular season.
How much do you think it affected us that we didn't have Mustafa Dombia in the starting 11?
I think that was part of it. I'm not sure that Whelan was necessarily, at fault for any of the goals directly. I think he did a really good job at right back, both at the end of the game against Austin and against Monarchs. But he's a key guy, right? You have Doumbouya in the lineup, and then you can play Whelan at right center back next to AJ Cochran, and then you're rolling with the same group of guys that you've had. So every little change that you have to make that you don't necessarily want to as a coach, whether that's as a result of injury or suspension or whatever it is, I think those are always going to play little parts into any result. And so missing Doumbouya, who after the start of the season, when I think he was a little bit shaky defensively, and he probably would admit that if you asked him, but he really became a solid rock at right back, both offensively and defensively. His evolution from start to finish is one of the most impressive developments. He's not a young guy either, but his ability to come into the system and adapt, it took him a little bit, but he got there, and he was a key part of this team.
Yeah, I agree, especially when it came to the communication and ball play between himself and Asante. One of the things I noticed right out of the gate from us offensively is that we were missing that connection down the right-hand side of the pitch. And so the ball was going a lot more over to Junior. Junior was getting the ball, I would say fully 25-30% more than normally we would go to that side. And Junior had his hands full because Junior's a fast guy and a talented guy. But whoever, I don't remember the name of the player, but he wasn't always on pace with Junior, but he seemed to position himself 8 times out of 10 in a way that would stop Junior. When Junior could break away, Junior would break away. But it became that guy learned to adapt and position fairly quickly. And it seemed when Junior could play around him, he would, because again, Junior's, he's phenomenal, right? But it seemed like Real, that guy stayed on Junior. He pulled back a little bit, and then the center back pulled out more. So it was kind of almost a doubling on Junior that you normally would see on Solomon, and then they would adopt, and you'd see 2-3 guys on Solomon on the other side. So it just seemed like they were switching back and forth very quickly.
100%. That's such an outstanding observation. Usually we see that combination on the right side with Solo, and then the right back, most often that's Doumbouya. But without that ability to combine on the right and then draw defenders in and then switch it over to Flemings on the other wing and allow him to run in space, because the opposing defense has to watch out for Solo. Essentially, that's what it comes down to. Without as much of that focus on the right side, it put more impetus on Junior Flemings to have to break down opposing defenses, and that's something he can do. We've seen him cut in from the left wing onto his right foot and then test the keeper from just outside the box or just inside the box. But he's much better when he's allowed to get the ball and run into a little bit of space. Against the Monarchs, he had to beat several guys consistently, and he really wasn't able to do that, which is understandable, right? That's not always the game plan that we've seen from Phoenix. That was something that they had to do as a result of personnel problems or whatnot, whatever it is. So Fleming's, I mean, he ended up dribbling a lot and losing the ball a lot. Just to be honest, he didn't have his best game in terms of ball security. One of the first 2 goals from the Monarchs, I don't remember if it was the first one or the second one, came from Fleming's losing the ball on the left wing, and they countered right down the field, and that was either 1-1 or 2-1.
That was
so it's
2-1.
Those little moments. 2-1. Yeah, thank you. So you make a great point there, and I think that was something that probably Rick would mention as being a little bit of a difference maker in that game, was just sort of a personnel shift, not from a defensive perspective with Mustafa, but maybe a slight offensive adjustment from what we've seen a lot of this season.
Interesting, and I like the way that you described that because it gets me thinking. The first goal really came from when Kevin Lambert wasn't able to get the ball from that Real player, and to me, it was a play that's going to happen. I remember I turned to my girlfriend when it went through, and I went, "I don't like how this is developing at all." And then boom, ball goes in the goal. That was damaging. Okay, that's going to happen. We know that Kevin has been stellar for us all year, but it seemed to me, and I want to see if you agree or not, that Kevin in the game after that play was not himself. That he just became nervous and hesitant with the ball. He just didn't seem to be on his A game after that play.
I definitely don't disagree at all. I think especially after we saw him play so well against Austin, I thought he was one of the bright spots in a game that was really not Phoenix's best. Asante came out and said he thought they played really well in that game, and I'm not sure I'd agree. I think that first round matchup against Austin was a pretty tough one from start to finish, but Lambert, especially defensively, was everywhere. And then once he won the ball, he played quickly and he played pretty smart. But then against the Monarchs, I don't think he quite had the same tenacity and confidence, and a lot of that likely does come down to that mistake that led to their first goal, the equalizer. It was a tough mistake to make, and then he's a young guy, right? He's a young guy, and by his own admission, he prefers to play a little bit higher up the field. I think he's actually better right where Rick Schantz has him as a defensive midfielder. I think that's his best spot, although he does enjoy getting forward and scoring goals, which is understandable, right? But he's young, he wants to go forward, and so it's still an adjustment for him to play that spot. And when you make a mistake like that in a huge game, it's going to rattle you. And I think we saw that, and he'll probably grow from that. He'll grow next season, whether that's here or somewhere else. I don't know if he'll be back next year or not. I'd expect that he would. I'd expect that he probably has a little bit more developing to do before making a jump to MLS or somewhere else around the world. But yeah, it was a tough error, especially in a big game like that. But yeah, Kevin, he'll grow from it, and he'll continue to improve as that defensive midfielder.
Yeah, it showed in a couple of the shots he took. Was not his typical self on those shots. They were so high over the goal. I felt really bad for him, and that sounds really patronizing, but I've been in that situation before, where not even just with sports, but with music, where I've come up and I've made a flub, and then it's just affected me the whole rest of the concert, right? I'm second guessing everything I'm doing at the keyboard, and I felt really, really bad, and I think it didn't help him that our midfield in general just wasn't playing their usual game. John Baquero just didn't seem like he was on his game that evening. He's a great player. I could argue that he's the biggest asset we have on the field, Asante aside. But he just didn't seem to be in his sweet spot. I don't know if that was disruption from Real. Did you get that perception? Do you think that Real just knew what they were doing?
And I think there's an overarching point to be made there. I don't know if Baquero necessarily was at his best or his worst against the Monarchs. It's not something that I necessarily keyed in on a ton from that game. Maybe I should have in hindsight. But I think it's fair to say that from a Monarchs perspective, he's the guy that you're keying in on in a midfield, right? He's the guy that you need to focus most of your defensive attention to, regardless of whether it's Joey Calistri, Lambert, James Musa, Aguinaga, whoever his two midfield partners are. Baquero is the creative force. He's the guy who can make things happen with the ball at his feet more than any of those other players. So, the Monarchs were able to limit him. I can remember one specific pass in the first half that was truly excellent from Vaquero, but there weren't a ton of game-changing plays from him or honestly from a lot of the other players in Phoenix Rising's starting lineup. So it's fair to give some credit to how the Monarchs came in there and game planned, and whether that was a specifically tactical thing that they were trying to stop Vaquero or whether that was just in-game execution from some of their defensive midfielders. Either way, the way they approached that and how they defended as a unit was admirable.
I totally agree, and you've got to give Real Monarchs props for what they did, because they did cause some disruption. And I don't want to. I think I'm leading this conversation in a way that makes it sound negative about the team. I'm really trying not to do that, because they're my team and I love these guys. But I think it's fair to look at what we were seeing on the field and what was happening. When you don't have your best game, you don't have your best game, and you got to recognize that as you do your best games, right? Otherwise, I'm just have a show that kisses everybody's butt, and I don't want that. When we talk about, and then I want to go to more positive things. When you look at what we did in the second half, there are people who have second guessed JJ coming on the field. Actually, I like the substitution. Do you feel like the adjustment that we made in the second half, including subs, helped us? Or do you feel like, maybe it wasn't as helpful as it was intended?
I think the energy coming out of the second half, and we'll get to subs in just a second, I think that the energy that the players had was good coming into the start of that second 45 minutes. We had a couple of chances from Phoenix towards the beginning of that half, and then another one in the middle where Joey Farrell hit that one over the bar. And there were chances at the beginning for them to get back in the match. And so that was an encouraging thing to see just from a tactical perspective. You come out of halftime and it's kind of make or break at that point, right? It's either we're going to lay down and maybe concede another one and kind of be out of it here at home, or we're going to jump out on the front foot and create a couple of chances. And they did the second option, which is the much more positive of the two. No goals were scored through that momentum and through that energy, but it's kind of all you can do at that point. And then looking at the subs, I think Rick was absolutely justified in bringing on Jason Johnson and Ben Spencer. You have these two guys pushing forward, pushing high, trying to overload the attack. I'm not sure really what else you can do. You don't have anything to lose at that point, right? You're down at home. It's single elimination. It's not like you're playing for a second leg. So I personally had no problem with JJ and Ben Spencer coming in, and then even sending Zach Lubin forward at the end of the match. I mean, he put all of his eggs in the one basket and threw the basket towards the goal. It just didn't go in.
Yeah, and you know what? I love your take on this, because I agree 1,000%. It showed that Rick was in it to win it. You're going to take your chances. You don't take risks, you're going to lose the game. When Lubin came trotting down the field, I just laughed. I was like, okay, yeah. Game on, baby. It was awesome. And so, there have been the naysayers out there on Twitter that drive me crazy. I thought that Rick coached a great game. And in a lot of ways, the players played a good game. Let me ask you this. What do you think was the shining spot in how Phoenix played against Real?
I think, honestly, this is going to sound really strange given the result, but I was just truly impressed with their ability to continue playing the same way that they've played all season. There were little differences. Rick specifically mentioned after the match that their game plan was to sit a little bit deeper defensively and to let the Monarchs control possession just a little bit more and try to attack in transition. And so that's a slight deviation from some of the themes that we've seen this season. But on the whole, just from start to finish, and I guess this is me trying to take more of a bird's eye view from the whole season and tie it into this match, the team's ability to adapt to the style that Rick wanted to play, especially after large stretches of rough preseason and then kind of a wild early start to the year with lots of draws and questionable results and just difficult games that we weren't quite sure what this team was going to look like come playoff time. Their ability to overcome those sort of difficulties and come back into this postseason with a consistent style that everyone was comfortable with and stick to it, right? And if we'd been looking at this game and they'd won 3-2 or they'd won 2-0 and not had those defensive mistakes or even 1-0, I think we'd be thinking about this match very positively. But again, because it's single elimination, because the result didn't go Phoenix's way, and not that they necessarily earned that victory. I think Monarchs were just as good, if not better, on the night. But that comprehensive style that they started and finished with this season, that's something that as a coach you can be proud of, and as players you can be proud that you stuck with what got you there, and you played your hardest essentially, and it did, all the factors just didn't come together. So I think just sort of a general stylistic positive from start to finish from the season.
Yeah, I so agree with you. The discipline that Rick has in his team is ridiculously high. They are tenacious. They are mentally tough. They are emotionally capable. Although they struggled with the emotion side at the beginning of the season, they shored that up. There was huge discipline on playing our type of football, and I agree with you. When they started to sit back a little bit, I thought, okay, well, that kind of makes sense because Real definitely was not shying away from coming at us, right? So it almost seemed to me like he was saying, okay, we're going to sit back a little bit. They can control that game a little bit, and it also saves some legs for us so that when we do hit on the offensive, we've got a little bit firmer legs. It's
And
the end of the
that's
season.
And that's, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. Just to add on that, I think one of the things that was somewhat frustrating, maybe to fans and just questionable throughout the season, was sort of Phoenix's continued attempts to break down really, really low defenses. And we saw it at the end of the winning streak, and then during that kind of rough stretch of results against Fresno and against New Mexico, these teams that would come and sit deep, and Phoenix would try to play through them, but they just couldn't do it. That's something that we're going to see again next season. As long as Rick Schantz is here, it seems like that's going to be something that we kind of have to watch for. But I really liked the approach against Monarchs to take maybe a little bit of a different perspective after that matchup earlier in the month, where Monarchs would come in and won 2-1 at home in the regular season, when essentially they just sat deep and Phoenix weren't able to break through, and adjust his own defensive game plan, allow his offense to create more opportunities. And I think that's a really promising development that could play an impact next season with how the team chooses to attack and approach teams that maybe are typically more inclined to sit a little bit deeper, and kind of draw them out and then allow Phoenix to exploit some of that space. So it didn't work out, but I think as sort of an overarching strategic point, it's definitely going to be a positive moving forward.
I love that. Yeah, I love that take. I totally agree with you. People who complain about us not being able to score when our opponent is sitting that deep just means they haven't played the game, because you have no idea how difficult it is to get through all those bodies and into the net when they're sitting deep. It is one of the hardest things to do in sports, I think. It is ridiculously difficult. That's where a Baquero really becomes key, right? You need that creative person in the midfield to be able to set us up, to have the vision, to be able to read, okay, here's where we can, develop something over here, or we've got a little space, or maybe this guy's missing the mark, and be able to react quickly and accordingly to get through that wall of bodies, so to speak.
And that's going to be such an interesting thing from a roster construction standpoint over this offseason leading into next year. We don't know if Baquero will be back or not yet, if he'll, sign here from Toronto, or if he'll go back there on loan, or, we don't know exactly what his future is. But whether or not they get Baquero back, whoever Rick puts into that midfield trio, exactly like you said, Kevin, one of them, at least one, needs to be a truly creative guy who can break down those defenses. And so seeing who fills that role next season is going to be really interesting, at least to me.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I would love for it to be Baquero. I would so love it to be Baquero, because there's so much off the pitch stuff that goes on with this team too, where he just clicks with the team. And that's, of course, hugely important. So let's dive right into a little bit of postseason. Is there anything else you want to say about that final game?
No, I think that was a really, really good kind of recap of that match, both looking at the whole season and then also specifically what went right and what went wrong in that game. That's, Kevin, I appreciate you facilitating that discussion, because I think maybe there hasn't been a ton of that just because the season ended and it's kind of like, oh, it's over. But that was a good recap and I think a comprehensive look at kind of what happened in that match.
Good. Great. I'm glad. I did something right. Wow. So let's talk about postseason. The question on everyone's mind is, what is the squad going to look like next year? Really, we have no idea, but when you take a look, let's just say let's start with the starting 11. Who do you think we've got a good chance of seeing on the pitch again next season?
So it's really tough, right? Because so many of these guys are right at that fringe. Are they good enough for MLS? Will an MLS team, come in and get them? What we don't really know quite what their level is or what their full potential is because we've seen them excel in this league. Does that mean they could make that jump? I mean, we don't know. But trying to look at some of these guys, I think kind of my thought the whole season has been maybe losing 4 guys to MLS. That might be a little high. It might be 3, and then obviously some guys are going to find different USL or look for opportunities elsewhere, whether that's other leagues in the US or abroad. So the roster turnover simply isn't the roster. The number of players they keep isn't going to be 100%. But I think of the typical starting lineup, maybe 3 or 4 of those guys aren't back. And again, I don't know who those players will be. Maybe that's Zach Lubin who tries his hand at in MLS preseason as a backup keeper in MLS, or whether that's Amadou Dia, who looks to head back to MLS because he's been such a consistent, solid presence at left back. He's, I don't think he'll take up an international roster slot in MLS, so that's a big advantage for some solid fullback depth. And then we talked about Lambert already. I don't think he'll make that jump quite yet, but he's got talent. If an MLS team wants to get him in, to be able to mold them into the player that they want to see, then maybe we see Lambert go. And then Becerra, we've talked about already. He could go back to Toronto. Adam John is probably the guy who's most likely, I think, to move back to MLS after a season here in Phoenix where he scored. He had some productive movement off the ball and as a facilitator as well. So I think he's kind of a no-brainer for an MLS team if he doesn't go. Simply, if he doesn't leave, I'll be surprised just simply because it seems like such a natural, obvious fit for some MLS team looking for an American, doesn't take up a roster slot from an international perspective. He's done it before. He knows the league. He knows the travel. All those things make him seem like a good fit. And then Asante and Junior could both, theoretically leave. I don't know. Again, I don't have insight onto their specific contract or transfer negotiations, but any one of those players that I just went through could go. All of them won't. That would be a real shock if all of them went through. But seeing 3 or 4 of those guys going either back to MLS or in the league for the first time wouldn't surprise me.
It's really an interesting situation for those individuals. And my list for MLS is pretty similar. I can see Junior. I can see Amadou. I hadn't thought of Zach, though. That's kind of weird that I hadn't thrown Zach into the mix. But yeah, Zach is a possibility. Adam John, definitely a possibility. I still feel like Kevin's got a little bit more development to do. I know he's chomping at the bit, to make a move to get somewhere that's, quote unquote, bigger time. But I do agree with you that I just think we'll see what happens there. Well, I had a point to all this. The choice that they have to make is very interesting to me because you have the choice to go to an MLS team and probably you're going to start off as a sub on that team, Adam John maybe being the exception. Or do you stay with the Phoenix Rising team whose roster is extremely promising for another killer season next year? Because the MLS is what it is, I'm not a huge fan of the MLS. I love the teams. I'm not a fan of the organization. If I were in their shoes, that would be something that would take some time for me to figure out what's best for me as a player. Of course, there's always the dollars. I'm sure that the dollars are going to be better right out of the gate from the MLS, and that's always a part of it. And of course, I love that they're going to have options. Always want to see players progress and be happy with what they're doing. It'll be interesting to see if some of them have the choice and decide to stay with Phoenix Rising, maybe because they think, what, next year let's make a run. Let's actually get the cup this time.
Yeah, it's a tough decision for these guys to make, and I'm frankly not sure how much of it is in their hands. Obviously, they have the final say, but it's kind of depending on which clubs come in and are interested in how Phoenix wants to structure their roster for next year. What we do know is that some of these players are going to start being announced pretty soon here. That was one of the things that Rick mentioned after that match against the Monarchs, where he was already looking forward to next season. He's already back in the office kind of looking at players. They already have some guys' contracts settled for next season. We just don't know which ones. So over the next week or two at the latest, we're going to start to see some some info trickle out. The club wants to tease it out. Obviously, that's what they like to do. I'm trying. So far, not a ton of success, but I'm trying to work behind the scenes and dig into some of this stuff as best I can to find out maybe a little bit before the club announces it or whatnot. But expectations on that front are low personally, just because they do keep such a tight lip on all the news coming in and out. But either way, whether that's something that's coming from me or from the club, we're going to start to see these guys, not all of them, but some of them, we're going to hear, announcements about their future pretty soon.
Yeah, to me, you're absolutely right, and it's going to be interesting to see. To me, the real interesting story here are the guys who typically are on the bench, because I think somebody like a James Musa could go anywhere and play anywhere and be a starter for any USL team out there. I don't know about MLS, but at least USL teams, does he sit there and say, you know what, I want to go, even though it's, a team XYZ, I want to start and make a move. Alessandro Riggi, I haven't heard any news around there. I saw a couple of things on Twitter that made me scratch my head and wonder. Have you heard anything about Riggi?
Yeah, I asked someone from the club, and they either didn't know or weren't willing to tell me. I asked him before the Monarchs game last week. But yeah, I saw the same post that you did, and that kind of got me assuming. Obviously, that's dangerous, but assuming that he likely won't be back. And Moose, I completely agree with you. I think he's in kind of a tough situation here. He might be better off looking for playing time elsewhere in the league.
Yeah, there are a couple of others like that. I think Ben Spencer, Joey Calistri, both could be starters for any number of teams. I would hate to lose either one of them, by the way. And the list goes on and on. The bottom line is it really speaks to the depth of the bench that we have at Phoenix Rising. It's just ridiculously deep. And it seems like if they can do that once, they can certainly do it again.
100%. The depth of this squad is truly impressive, and it's one of the strongest things about the team from this past season, and I would expect it to be an equally strong part of how the roster is built for next year. How many of the guys we see back, those bench players that played a huge part in the season that you just kind of ran through, whether or not we'll see those guys return, again, we just don't know. But either way, an absolute credit to them for how they contributed to the team this season, more so than probably many other rotation guys around the league. And obviously, best of luck to whatever the future holds for them, whether that's here in Phoenix or somewhere else.
Yeah, because they're great players, but they're just great individuals. I have, with one exception, who I will not name from last year, they've all just been stellar people. I mean, through and through. It's crazy. Any of them, and I say this on my interviews all the time with them, if your mom and dad's watching, you should be very proud of this kid because he's just good people. And it's always that way. And I think it speaks to what Rick's developed in the team, them as their personalities, but Rick, he creates this chemistry, and I think Peter Ramage has a lot to do with that. Blair Gavin, of course, also. They have great chemistry as coaches, as far as I can tell, and I'm no expert there, but it just seems like they gel so well. They're able to take that and create a team that's got amazing chemistry also. So yeah, that's going to be a big part of next year, I think, because that chemistry, I think, was a huge part of why we came together at the end of so many games and were able to win, because there was nobody playing the selfish ball. We were giving it up, right? We were working together as a team to accomplish a goal instead of a bunch of individuals.
100%. It's so easy to overlook, right? It's even easy for me to overlook because I spend so much time looking at what happens just on the field in those 90 minutes. But the chemistry and the player's character, but all the things you just outlined essentially is a huge part of the success this season, and it's a pillar of what Phoenix Rising's front office are trying to build here, and they have built essentially. Bobby Dooley, in a story I was doing on the team's sort of status after Drogba left the club earlier this year, he and I were talking, and he specifically took time to mention that they look for high character guys. They look for quality individuals to come into this group, because not only they're building an on-field product, but they're building a culture. And that's something that you hit at so perfectly there. It's easy to miss. But for those of us who have seen kind of up close or fans, any of these things, who have gotten a glimpse into kind of who these guys are and what they are building here together as a group, it's encouraging to see. And I have no doubt that they'll bring in equally high character guys for whichever players are new to the team next season.
There is a lot to look forward to. That is for sure. I'm exhausted from this season, so I really need some time off. I'm getting old, uh, but I am looking forward to next year. Who do you think is the big bad team that we're going to be going against next year?
Ooh, I mean, man, it's so tough because it's almost hard for me not to say the Monarchs again, just because each season we see them be so competitive. Some guys coming down from RSL, but just the quality of players that they bring in consistently to play for that squad is tough, man. I've seen some things about not wanting to start rivalries with two teams, but the way that they play consistently, how they're structured, bringing guys up from the academy and siphoning them through to the first team, they're such a talented squad of guys that each year they're so difficult to write off. El Paso is another one. El Paso and New Mexico both, I think, are the absolute credit to how they came into the league this year. You can talk about off the field stuff, whatever, but the way that those two teams came in and performed this season is truly impressive. And I think they'll be back again next year, and they won't be pushovers.
I love that take. El Paso to me is the dark horse. Came out of nowhere, really built a squad that all of a sudden has just really clicked together at a level that this is where the sum is greater than the parts by a long shot. Whereas I would say with the Real Monarchs, they are more parts than they are the sum. They do really well in the sum, but not to the degree that El Paso has. And it's going to be a dogfight between those two. Do you have a pick on who's going to win that game?
Oh man, it's tough to Monarchs are home, aren't they? I believe they're the higher
Yes.
seed.
Yep.
Just for that kind of as the X factor, I have a slight leaning towards them advancing to USL Cup, but I can really see that going either way. Both teams have two, talented attacking players. So that's Martinez and Chang for Monarchs, and then for El Paso, you got Velasquez, sorry, and Kissawetter. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce that last one, but both of these two groups have some outstanding attacking talent. It could go either way, but slight edge just to the home team.
Yeah, I've got to give the advantage to the home team. There's a part of me that just really wants to lean towards El Paso, but harsh reality is that Monarchs are just on a hot streak. I think they're coming off of a high, defeating us, and they are going to be at home. Those are a lot of advantages. We'll see. So let's look at the East Coast real quick. We've got Indy 11 and Nashville, right?
Yeah, I believe so. Honestly, the East seems like a whole nother world, right?
Oh, well, it's because we're so separated from them. There's just no crosstalk till the final cup game. I've watched more lately than I have earlier in the season. Some East Coast games, and the style of football definitely is very different over there. I think actually USL memes. If you saw that meme they did with the two little girls, and one showed the Western Conference playoffs, and the other was the Eastern. And the Eastern girl looked all prim and proper, and the Western Conference looked like she'd been hit by a bus. I think that's absolutely accurate.
And I've just looked it up. It's Louisville versus Indy for that championship game
Oh,
for the Eastern
Louisville, that's
Conference.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're all the same down there. It's Louisville. Yeah. Um, so I got to go against Louisville. I'm picking Indy, and I have no real reason to do it. Louisville knocked us out last year, so screw those guys.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'd be lying if I said I had any idea. Louisville, just from an experience perspective, where they've been the last couple of seasons, it'd be hard not to give the edge to them. But at the same time, Indy are a talented group of guys. The moves they made in the offseason were truly impressive, and clearly they have the talent to win this match. So it's kind of a toss-up in my mind. If it'll make you happy, Kevin, I'll go for Indy, and then we'll see an El Paso Indy final if we're going with our hearts.
There we go. Okay, that's fair. I did watch the Battery Louisville game. Louisville won it in the last couple of minutes of last half of overtime. And I just thought to myself, man, these are two teams that we could have beat. It was just really a shame. And I watched Indy 11, and I think that would have been a little bit more of a crapshoot. I think Indy 11 has some great talent, especially when it comes to their defense. So they would have given us some problems there. But I'm going to go with Indy 11. We'll see what happens. When it comes down to it, if it is Indy and Real, though, I'm gonna give Real the nod for the win. Not just because I want Western Conference to take it, but I think that Real's got the talent, like you said, Chang. Come on, this dude is awesome. He is one of the best strikers in the USL. Well, probably second to Asante. Their defense is disciplined. They were quick to maneuver against us. They just seem to be like they would be gelatinous and move and then solidify into rock, and then they become jello again and move and then become rock again. Huge props to them for what they are, because they're on a hot streak. So my thing is I see Real taking this whole thing.
It wouldn't surprise me one bit, just seeing how well they played against Phoenix, exactly as you detailed. They've got as good of a shot, if not a better shot, to win this thing as anybody.
But it will be interesting to see. Is there anything I've missed? Anything you want to bring up about Phoenix Rising before we close this down?
I mean, other than just, and we kind of hit on this, next season isn't far away, right? One of the shortest off seasons in sports. It'll be nice to have a little bit of a respite. But news is going to start coming out soon, and preseason's going to be here before we know it. So the nice thing is, even when the season ends kind of unceremoniously and unexpectedly, it's not that long that you've got to wait for more soccer. So next season will be here before we know it, and I'm excited.
I'm excited too. I'm just trying to keep with the Bundesliga now, and that's enough. Well, listen, I appreciate your time as always. It's fantastic to have you. You are such a boon to the USL and everything that you touch. Your insight, always fantastic, Joe. Why don't you let everybody know, if they don't already, where they can find you?
Yeah, first of all, everyone, I did not pay Kevin to say any of those nice things about me. That was all him. Kevin, just kidding. The check will be in your inbox tomorrow. So you can find me on Twitter at Joe in Cleats, which is kind of my general soccer Twitter page. And then for Phoenix Rising specific stuff, at Rising Tactics. And then that's a link to my website as well, which is risingtactics.com.
And then you write a lot for The Athletic, which I think is, what, $5 a month, and money well spent. Love some of the articles that you have there. I actually subscribed just because I got angry because I tried to read your article and do it. I was like, I'm reading this.
It's honestly, even before I started writing there, which is about a year and a half ago, just some of the stuff they have is truly quality, which is becoming rarer and rarer. Just journalistically throughout the country, and then soccer specifically, it's tough to get good stuff. And Jeff Reuter is doing some good stuff with the USL. So if you're kind of not feeling MLS too much, but have some interest in lower league stuff here, I hope to have more of that next season, and I know there'll be just more of a continued push to have more USL content on there. So that's my little pitch for that. Subscribe if you want. They run deals pretty frequently. So I agree with Kevin. It really is money well spent.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Joe. Appreciate your time. Look forward to seeing you next season.
Thanks again, Kevin.